Good morning. So hopefully we don't run out of time tonight or today, but let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. Welcome to the Reinvestment Zone number 2 special meeting, May 16th, 2023. The meeting is called to order. Secretary Huerta, if you would please call the roll.
Chairman Dan Suckley.
Here.
Board members Libby Ayer.
Here.
Roland Barrera is absent. Sylvia Campos. Here. Brent Chesney. Here. Joe Gonzalez is absent. Paulette Guajardo.
Present.
Gil Hernandez is absent. Oh, there you are. Oh, you snuck in. I didn't see you. Michael Hunter is absent. Jim Klein.
Here.
John Mattis. Here. Mike Pesley. Okay, here? Okay. I'm here. All right. Everett Roy is absent, and Connie Scott. Here. Okay, we do have a quorum present to conduct the meeting.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make public comment this morning? All right. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry I didn't sign up yet. Was there a sheet?
No. You're fine. Come forward.
I apologize. My name is Troy Adler. I serve on the Nueces County Coastal Parks Board, and we've been a recipient of some funds in the past. We want to thank you for that. We have some really big plans, hopefully for the Briscoe King Pavilion. I think with the Schlitterbahn leaving, we've lost a lot of public space for the community to use for different facilities, and I think the Briscoe King Pavilion would be an excellent asset for that. We've got great parking, we've got great access to the beach, and the facility's not even air conditioned, so we've got a lot of work to do out there. We've got a lot of things, as you know, we're doing right now with the Coastal Parks Board throughout the county, but going forward, we really going to. The $2 million just scratches the surface, as you've heard many times, putting lipstick on a pig kind of scenario feels like. But any additional funds that y'all can push our way, we'd surely be appreciative, and I guarantee you we'll use it in a very efficient manner. So thank y'all for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment? All right. We'll close public comment and move on to the agenda item. Item I, discussion and possible action for identified project categories and funding allocations, including parks and infrastructure projects, mobility projects, developer reimbursements, TIRZ administration, and water, wastewater infrastructure to be included in the project and financing plan. Staff, do we have a presentation?
Good afternoon, or even morning, actually. Heather Hurlbert, Director of Finance. So this is the, this is, I think, about our third or fourth meeting that we've met over the last 6 months, talking about TIRZ number 2. So we did begin in October and November, and what we've accomplished to date is that we have had the approval for the extension of the TIRZ until December 31st, 2042. And then we've added additional board members for the county representatives. We have modified boundaries to include not only the portions of White Cat Preserve, but also for consideration was the boundary extension to include the Nueces County Nature Park and Valley Park area, including the Briscoe King Pavilion. Then we have amended the project and financing plan and added about $50 million worth of projects to it, which included $2 million, the initial $2 million for improvements to the Briscoe King Pavilion, $36.4 million for the ongoing maintenance of Packery Channel over the next 20 years, $11.5 million for White Cat Preserve developer reimbursements, and $150,000 for the mobility plan. And so those have all been taken to council and have been approved and added to the ordinance for the TIRZ. So then back last month in April 18th meeting, the board did approve a recommendation for a revenue contribution amount. There was a recommendation for allocation of a total of $150 million for projects to the project and financing plan, and then recommended the amendment to the fiscal year 2023 budget. So those have all been gone to council and have been approved. I think on second reading will be today, so they will be finished. So what we have left is to really decide out of that $150 million, what goes into each project type of budget, and then also to include possible eligible projects. Now, up to this point, we've talked specifically about dollar amounts associated with those projects, but my recommendation would be, since these are going to be over a long period of time, is include those projects as eligible projects under the different categories, but not associate specific dollar amounts with them yet. And then what we'll do is, as we go through the budget process over the next several years, is then decide what dollar amounts need to be associated with those projects as we're ready to move forward with them. So like I mentioned, we have already added $150 million of specific projects to the project and financing plan. Like I said, which included the Packery Channel maintenance for the next 20 years, the $2 million for the Briscoe Keep Pavilion, $11.5 million for the Whitecap Reserve reimbursement, and then $150,000 for the mobility plan, which stemming from the mobility study. So what our recommendations are is that we have 5 basically large categories of projects, which would be parks and infrastructure projects, mobility projects, developer reimbursements, TIRZ administration, and then water wastewater infrastructure. So we had identified a total of $185 million in projects that are eligible to use the estimated $150 million that we have available for the funding as of now. God bless you. So then the different projects that were identified with the infrastructure are listed here. These are estimated dollar amounts to come up with the $54.8 million that was recommended to be included in the parks and infrastructure bucket or category type. Included are additional $10 million, which is not tied to a specific park as of yet, and then also an additional $10 million for the second causeway. This was brought up in discussion at our last meeting on April 18th, and so the recommendation does include those, but like I said, the recommendation would be for a large dollar amount, the $54.8 million, to be included in parks and infrastructure. And then as we work through deciding how that money gets allocated as those projects come forward. And then moving into the mobility project type, we've identified the mobility plan implementation phase 1 and phase 2, along with various pedestrian and bike safety improvements, and then possible improvements to Park Road 22 pedestrian and access management improvements. So these 4 different project types or categories equal an estimated $17.3 million. Again, my recommendation would be is that we don't associate specific dollar amounts with these 4 different projects, but have the dollars in the overall bucket. And then as we move forward and we're ready to move forward with these projects, then we assign the dollar amounts to how much based off of what the plan is at the time. Then we have the developer reimbursement administration. So here, the $11.5 million has already been identified for the Whitecap. The board has approved allocation of $17.9 million for developer reimbursement for Lake Padre, which will be coming back to the board with a developer agreement for that. Then I included an additional estimated $20 million. We know that there's been already talk of some other developments on the island that may be coming for reimbursement for public infrastructure in the future. This is something that if this money isn't used or there's not a developer that comes forward for this ask, that we can always reallocate this to another bucket of funds as we move along. Like I've talked about previously, your project and financing plan is a living, breathing document, and we can reallocate these funds as needed. And then this also does include $2 million for administration. This is estimated off of the current cost for the administration over the next 20 years. This is just depending on how active the TIRZ is and how much staff time is needed for this TIRZ. This number may fluctuate either lower or higher, just depending on the cost of it. Then moving into water wastewater. So these water, wastewater, all the ones that are listed on here are actually already included and slotted within the CIP. And so what the recommendation here is that would include, maybe 38 million or so for possible utility extensions and additional capacity in support of economic development projects, instead of listing these specific projects. And talking with the utilities, like I said, these are slated, they've been included in our 10-year CIP, they've been included in the rate modeling, and so there is sufficient funding for these projects. What I would recommend is that we do include some funding in this water wastewater bucket in case something needs to be moved up. So say that there is more rapid development on the island, and maybe we need to move up the third water line extension out to the island, we'd be able to tap into these funds, and either, use them to get the project started until it's ready within the CIP, or how that shifts around, but be able to do that. The other thing is that we've had some challenges on the island with utilities, because there are portions of the island that do not have sufficient utilities yet, and it is expensive to extend those utilities. So in support of economic development, the board may choose to allocate funds to a specific development to help extend those utilities to help promote that development in that area. Sure.
So Heather, that, again, I want to be sure I understand, that would be over and above what this council has already budgeted for our CIP program on the island, is that correct?
That would be over and above, that would be in addition to.
So these are just allocated amounts that we would tap into to utilize if we needed to?
Exactly.
Not necessarily that we would have to.
Not necessarily that we'd have to, and if the need does not arise, then this could be, these funds could be reallocated somewhere else. But this gives you the ability, because, the project and financing plan will lay out how you can use those funds. And so having an allocation of funds in something to support water, wastewater infrastructure, I think would be a good idea, in case those needs do arise, and you are there, and then you don't have to go back and amend the project and financing plan to allow for those projects.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is working. Is that working? Okay. Heather, and while Troy's here too, it'd be helpful to ask the question, assuming that the new financing plan passes and has the additional allocation for Briscoe King.
Yes.
Can you just describe then, because they're ready to get to work on that project,
Sure.
how then do they need to submit and go forth in getting those funds at some point?
Sure. So, the project and financing plan lays out the large categories it can be used on, and Briscoe King is specifically listed. And so what would need to happen is, after the project and financing plan is approved, then the county would need to come forward as an entity, in essence, with an ask, just like a developer would, with saying, hey, this is our project plan, this is how we plan to use the money. Then the board would approve that, just like we would with any other entity, and then we would enter into an agreement, the city council would enter into the agreement with the county through an interlocal agreement, because it would be government to government, for the allocation of those funds. Primarily, we'd have to decide whether or not it's a reimbursement basis, or it would be an upfront basis.
And having not submitted any
Sure.
of those things to the TIRZ before on behalf of the county, since this is our first project to do so, would you have something that you could send to us that they could start with, kind of a, just a cheat sheet, I guess, for lack of a better term, that someone else had submitted, just to give us an idea of how would be the best way to submit
Sure.
it, so we don't get it kicked back because it doesn't have what you need, or
Exactly.
whatever the case may be?
Exactly, yeah. Staff would be more than happy to sit down with county staff to go through and walk through what you have, the best way to submit that, what type of details would be needed, in our opinion, to present to make the best case to the board.
Okay, that'd be great. We'll get our Coastal Parks Director with you,
Sure.
and hopefully he can get that
Great.
process rolling. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board? With no questions, I'll entertain a motion for approval. Mr. President.
Heather, in our packet that we received at home, there was a map showing the areas, and do you have that included here, and it showed the expansion areas? Because I
Yeah.
had, part of that was delineated as to the expansion over to catch the King Pavilion.
Yes.
But up to the north of that map, there were two areas, and they were not delineated as to what they were, and I was just curious.
So I do not have that map. That is actually in your council packet. There were two little areas up at the top that were in blue versus the ones that were in red.
Right.
The ones up in blue were the ones that the board and council have already approved to ensure that the Whitecap development was wholly contained within the TIRZ. So there was
Okay.
those two little, what we call kind of the shoulders up at the top that were not part of the TIRZ. And so that was approved back in December to include those little pieces into the TIRZ so that the development, the PID, and the TIRZ all covered the same
Yeah,
areas.
I would just ask in the future when they include things like that in our packet to please delineate what
Okay.
those, because they sent a map and it had all these crosshatched areas on it, and there was no description about what any of that was.
Okay, it should have, and I'll have to double check. Sometimes when we convert that document, it did have on there, when I put the map in there, the one was for the Briscoe King area and the Valley Park area, and the
Yeah.
other was in Oasis
I
County.
saw that one, yeah.
Okay.
But the rest of it wasn't.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Chairman, I'll move to approve.
And for clarification, we're approving the recommended project funding allocation in that staff's recommending in the packet?
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Okay.
The buckets. Yes,
And-
ma'am. We have
and-
a first.
Second.
We have a first and a second. We have one more question. Mr. Hernandez?
Yeah, I guess I said I was a little disappointed on the amount allotted for the second causeway to to the island. With the amount of funding that is associated with doing economic development, you're just pouring gasoline on more people, more traffic, and not really, planning for that second causeway. Just even on the Mud Bridge, the deal we have with TxDOT is a 90-10 split. And so I would imagine something similar if they came to us with a bridge opportunity as well. So I would think this would be a great source to account for that. If you're going to include that in a bucket for mobility or utilities or whatever, I would suggest that you include it there, so it may be the opportunity to do that, especially if you have funding that's already planned in the CIP through our rate model, through rates for water, wastewater type projects. So I would, I don't know if you can include that in that kind of bucket, but if that's the case, I think we're just shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't plan for the additional growth and traffic. I'm pretty sure the island residents have a hard time getting off the island as it is in heavy traffic or even just in the morning or in the evening. So anyway, thank you.
Sure. And at a future time, once that understanding of what that cost may be or what the city ask may be, that it can definitely be modified. We put kind of a placeholder in there of about $12 million for the environmental study and then support. And so if there is something, that's something that can be moved maybe from that utility bucket if that's not being used specifically over for the causeway. But it's definitely a flexible plan and can be amended at any time.
Well, hopefully we won't empty out the trust funds anymore with this as part of the plan. Thank you.
Okay.
So Chairman, I would want to ask, would the motion also include the specific projects that we have listed as eligible or just the large categories of funding?
Mine was intended for the specific projects as
Yeah.
well, but I don't
Okay.
know who
I
made
would
the
say
motion.
specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have a first and a second supporting the approval of the specific projects.
In addition to the plan, you want it all encompassing, right?
Exactly. So what would be the approval of the recommended allocation with the inclusion of the specific projects under each category.
Correct. And as mentioned, and for the record, to Gil's point, this is a breathing document, so it
Yes.
can be amended later should we need to do that. And that, I think, is the safest thing to do regarding that specific project, the causeway or what have you.
So while it's breathing, we'll get our allocation in quick. So.
Breathing, exactly, before the air stops. Okay, so
All right. So any other questions or comments from board? All right. So we have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
I
Aye.
Any dissent? All right, passes unanimously. With no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.